in this wonderful venue, in this wonderful city, so important to the 21st century. I'm here to tell you about the NYU Shanghai program on creativity and innovation. I'm very pleased to say that a number of my colleagues from the program are here, as well as, very importantly, 23 students from NYU Shanghai. We counted them, and all 23 are here this morning. So let me extend my own welcome and also express my own gratitude for being here. So, the other day, a student from NYU Shanghai, Ishu Lin, came to see me. She had an assignment from her professor. Her professor had asked her to go and interview some people on the topic of creativity. So she picked out a few of her favorite professors and other acquaintances, and I was one of them, and she came to my office. And she asked me, as you see, "Professor, what are some of the things that you routinely do to try to boost your creativity?" Now, I'm used to being asked hard questions by students. I work in applied mathematics myself, so I often get asked hard questions in math, and I have to go home and think very hard. And sometimes I ask questions about careers, and those are, of course, very important questions, and I have to think carefully. But this was a really tough question, because the truth is, I don't sit down every day and ask myself, how creative am I? How creative am I being today? How is my creative energy? But I decided I would give the question some thought. And one of the things that occurred to me is that maybe being creative is not only the things we first hear. So we know that being creative is partly and importantly about having confidence, about exploration, about seeking the extraordinary. But maybe that's not the whole story. Maybe we need to give ourselves permission also sometimes to feel a little less confident, maybe even a little insecure at times. Maybe, and I'll talk more about this later, it's important to think about the ordinary and look around us and not only search out for the extraordinary. So, I come from Britain originally. I left Britain 30 years ago as a graduate student and moved to the United States. But I'm very proud of my British heritage, and so I decided to do a little research into what some famous Brits had said on the subject of creativity. Here's something I came up with. So this, of course, is John Lennon, and so we have on the highest authority, and I think you agree that John Lennon was pretty creative, kind of good at creativity. And he said, part of me suspects that I'm a loser, and the other part of me thinks I'm God Almighty. So he's talking about creativity in two ways, I think. He's talking about the confidence, almost the grandiosity, the belief that one can do something very big. But he's also talking about perhaps a less confident side of himself, even an insecure part of himself. And that's okay too. And not only is that okay, perhaps that's very important, equally important, to engaging in creative activity, to finding creativity in oneself. So I read a very interesting book recently. I highly recommend that, at least for some of your life, you decide to become a professor. Maybe not all of you, because I know this room has very, very smart people in it, and I don't want too much competition. I kind of like being a professor. But at least for a while, I highly recommend you be a professor, because your job actually consists, not entirely, but in good part, of being paid to read. It's a very nice job. So this is a new book. I highly recommend it to everyone in the room. I recommend it to students. I recommend it to teachers. I recommend it to policymakers, to entrepreneurs and business people. It's called The Politics of Innovation. It's focused on innovation in the areas of science and technology. And it's written by Mark Zachary Taylor, who's a professor at the Georgia Institute of Technology, Georgia Tech. And he has an excellent review of the extensive work that has been done on looking at which nations are more and which nations are less successful at innovation in the areas of science and technology. And there's lots of work and lots of ideas about institutions and policies in different countries. Some seem more conducive to innovation, some less so. But there are also a lot of puzzles and paradoxes. Some countries that would appear to have very poor institutions and policies are very successful at innovation. And conversely, there are countries that would seem to have all the right ingredients in place, but are not so successful at innovation. And Mark Taylor has a very interesting hypothesis that he thinks is part of the picture. Not the whole picture, but definitely part of the picture. It has a wonderful name. He calls it the creative insecurity hypothesis. And he thinks it's important that entire countries, not only individuals, express self-confidence, have appropriate policies and institutions, that maybe a dose of insecurity is not such a bad thing either. That insecurity may come from external circumstances, dependence on strategic inputs, it may be more psychological, it may be historical. It plays a role. So I remember when I was in school, I was a very good student in school. I don't know how good a professor I am. I'm still trying to figure that one out. But I did love to study. Actually, the truth is, a professor is still a student. And we learned about the very famous moment in 1957 when the Russians launched the world's first artificial satellite called Sputnik. Here you see a picture of Sputnik. It's a little shiny golf ball, about the size of a grapefruit, actually. And Sputnik circled the Earth, and this caused a lot of anxiety. As Sputnik went over the night sky across the United States, the newspapers were busy getting the headlines ready for the next morning. Russians conquer space. Don't look up, Sputnik's up there. You see my slide, it's a little like Sputnik sent a postcard from space and said, "Hey you down there, I'm looking down at you." So Sputnik created a moment of national anxiety. It was a very dramatic moment. Not all such moments of thinking about the need for innovation are quite as dramatic, but it created a very dramatic moment, and it had very positive consequences. The United States invested heavily in science and technology, education, a great expansion of research and teaching in universities in those areas. Of course, it invested in aerospace and satellite technology, but the big benefits were not so much only in the direct areas of aerospace and the like. There was a great expansion in the knowledge and benefits of science and technology. So, creativity, confidence, adventure, trying things, not always succeeding. We read about this. It's all very important. But it's more interesting than that. It's also about wondering if one has the capacity, being propelled into a moment perhaps through some sense of doubt or question or even insecurity. Now, why do I talk in this fashion? So I should come clean. One of my favorite concepts is duality. So I come to the concept of duality from a science background, and my first encounter was in physics, the very famous duality between waves and particles. Of course, I think duality is an idea that many people arrive at through many different journeys. That was my particular journey. Here we have one of the giants of quantum mechanics, Niels Bohr, the very famous Danish physicist of the early 20th century, who said many wonderful things. I highly recommend become a professor and you can be paid to read what Niels Bohr said. One of the wonderful quotes, it's really one of my favorites, is what Niels Bohr says here. He says, "The opposite of a shallow truth is false, but the opposite of a deep truth is also true." And I think that's a wonderful statement of duality. So when we think about creativity, and this is something we think about in our program at NYU Shanghai, we try to take, if you like, a more sophisticated view, a more nuanced view, a view that there is duality involved. There is confidence, but maybe there's also a dose. Not a crippling dose, but a dose of artistic insecurity that propels one forward. By the way, on this slide, you see a movie created at IBM Research. Many of you will be familiar with this. It is dubbed the world's smallest movie. Here you have a boy, let us imagine this is a young Niels Bohr, playing with an atom. And the little shiny dots you see are individual oxygen atoms on carbon monoxide molecules. Very famous, the world's smallest movie. Let me move on then to tell you a little bit about duality and creativity and how these ideas are embedded in our program at NYU Shanghai and some of the ideas and topics that we teach. Here is the outline of one of our courses. It's called Creativity Considered. We consider creativity. We explore it. We don't have a cookbook. We don't have a recipe. We have an exploration or a consideration. So we have creativity is extraordinary. It's the freedom. It's the new. It's the individual. It's the confidence. It's the idea. And you can imagine a few other topics. But we also have the duality. Creativity is the ordinary, not only the extraordinary. It's the constraint, not only the freedom. It's the combination of what exists, not only the new. It's not only the individual, it's the collective. It's not only the confidence, as I've been talking about, it may also be a dose of the insecurity. It's not only the idea, it's the embodied idea in real life human beings. You get the idea. So this is an exploration, a consideration in one of our courses at NYU Shanghai in our program on creativity and innovation. I like duality. I like duality a lot. Okay, let me tell you in a little more detail how we delve into one of these topics, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about the architecture of the whole program. Okay. This is actually an image of a wonderful piece of installation art by a Korean artist whose name I can supply later. It's a room installation. As you can see, it's a little bit, to use an unusual term, defamiliarized. So defamiliarization is a concept that was created in the 1920s by a brilliant Russian literary theorist, Viktor Shklovsky. Shklovsky was studying the writings of Tolstoy, and he observed that among many other features, Tolstoy's writings engaged commonly a device that he named defamiliarization. He saw that Tolstoy would often describe things or situations without using their common accepted names, almost stubbornly refusing to name them the way that we usually name them. Or he would describe a scene, such as a great battle in War and Peace, but he would focus on some small, apparently insignificant piece of the scene and magnify it out of all proportion. He would distort the landscape or the situation. And Shklovsky, this Russian literary theorist, saw in this part of the power of Tolstoy's prose, that our readers were engaged in their intellects, in their feelings, and their imagery, in part through this device which he called defamiliarization. So defamiliarization is kind of an intriguing way to think about creativity as the ordinary. Can we look around us in everyday life and engage in an exercise of defamiliarizing? And might there be some creative payoff from doing so? I don't know. We'll try it out, and the best way to try it out is in the classroom. So it's one of the things we teach. Let me tell you in this vein about one of my favorite entrepreneurs of my experience, a man called Robert Taylor from Minneapolis. I met him many years ago. I'm a mathematician, so sometimes I say things in ways that make sense, mostly to other mathematicians. What Robert Taylor achieved is what we mathematicians would call a probability zero event. He pulled off the seemingly impossible. So cast your eyes actually at this image. To your right, in the far corner, you see an ordinary sink. Why do I mention the sink? So Robert Taylor had a problem. He walked into the freshly cleaned, proudly sparkling bathroom of a home somewhere in the United States, in his mind. And most of us would see shiny surfaces and a nice mirror, maybe the color scheme, but not to Robert Taylor. True story. What he saw was a giant puddle of ooze. What am I talking about? I'll get there. A veritable habitat for bacteria to grow and multiply, probably bacteria from Mars. What he was looking at was the bar of soap sitting in the soap dish. And however recently, spotlessly clean the bathroom was, the moment this bar of soap was used, in his defamiliarized vision, there was this outsized, grotesque, oozing presence in the otherwise perfect bathroom. Entrepreneurs are wonderful people. They're quite eccentric. I hope I can qualify to join the club of eccentrics because they're the best people. This is how Mr. Taylor saw a bathroom. So he decided to do something about it. He decided to revolutionize the entire soap industry. Not just a specialty product. He decided he was going to take on the big soap companies, Unilever, Procter & Gamble, and he created the first liquid soap in a pump dispenser for the home with a nice 1980s design around the pump dispenser. We might look at that 1980s design in 2016 and it wouldn't quite make the cut today, but it was very right for the time. So he put liquid soap in a nicely designed dispenser and he fought his way onto the supermarket shelves. He had a wonderful name for his product. He called it soft soap. And soft soap became a major product. All the major soap makers reluctantly followed suit and added it to their product lines. You can still find soft soap on sale today. One person, more or less out of his, if not garage, let us say kitchen sink, revolutionized the entire soap industry. Now you may think Mr. Taylor was a one-hit wonder. He wasn't. I'll tell you briefly another of his escapades, and you might get a sense why he's perhaps my favorite entrepreneur. Before I do that, let me emphasize. So Mr. Taylor, whom I met and I listened to his stories, he had his own instincts and reasons for doing what he did. But when I think about his story, I think about how he refused to see a domestic scene, namely the bathroom, the way one normally sees it. In some sense, he defamiliarized it, or he did something that we can understand in these terms. He wasn't satisfied, by the way, with taking on the soap industry. He next decided to revolutionize the fragrance industry. I'll keep it brief. At the time, the rights to use the Calvin Klein name on fragrances were available. You know, the fashion industry, especially before it became as large as it is today, would have its ups and downs. At some point, they were sold off to raise some cash. He obtained these rights, and he decided that perfume should no longer be advertised as Chanel No. 5 was advertised. So he created a new fragrance. People my age will never forget the ad campaign. The fragrance was called Obsession. The ad campaign featured a young British, I'm proud of my fellow Brits, a young British model called Kate Moss, and every Calvin Klein ad campaign you have seen ever since basically follows in the footsteps of this campaign that Mr. Taylor created. Okay, let me talk a little bit more then about our program as a whole. So I'm an academic, and so we do like our definitions. We don't obsess over our definitions, but we like to have some guiding lines to our programs and our teaching. So this is an ambitious program at NYU Shanghai. The students present, many of them have taken one or more of the courses that we're offering. We're growing more courses. By the way, I should say, the NYU Shanghai program is a startup within a startup. NYU Shanghai is itself only 3 years old. We will be very proud to graduate our first class this coming May. And within NYU Shanghai, our program is a startup itself. So we fit right in. We know all about a vision and chaos, especially the chaos part. We're very good at that. We have some kind of broad definitions. We want to span the spectrum from creativity through innovation to entrepreneurship. We know this is ambitious. Even more, we define these terms broadly. So in the case of creativity, we talk about new ideas, but we don't only have in mind new business ideas. We take a very broad definition. Under innovation, we talk about new things and processes, not only products. And entrepreneurship for us could encompass many real-world activities. We have active and exciting student startups, but once again, we are ambitious and we are spreading ourselves broadly to support the entirety of NYU Shanghai, which is a full university with many majors across the humanities and the sciences as well as in business. Okay. Now, this strange picture is here to remind me of something very important. And to any of you who teach in this area, you'll know about this pitfall. So, I very quickly learned that it was a very bad idea to turn up at NYU Shanghai and say to my fellow professors and to students, "Hi, I'm from New York. I'm here to teach you about creativity." Because the way anybody should react to that, and the way I myself would react to that, would be, "Really, I'm pretty creative already. I wonder if you have anything to add." So, of course, universities, everybody here today, the world is full of creativity. So, we have to be very mindful of what we can add as a program in creativity and innovation. I'm an applied mathematician. Mathematicians are highly creative people. One of the mathematical greats, Henri Poincaré, the great French mathematician around the turn of the 20th century, he had the very famous Poincare conjecture, solved in recent years, among many other fundamental pieces of mathematics. He wrote brilliantly about creativity 100 years before modern studies of creativity even began. And he pinpointed the importance of combination. Some people make it almost the definition of creativity. I think it's part of creativity. It was on our earlier list. He talked about creativity in mathematics and beyond, and he talked about how some of the most creative acts are when somebody takes ideas, two or more ideas, that seem completely far apart. They seem to live in very different parts of the intellectual or physical world. They have nothing to do with each other, so it would seem. And yet, by bringing them together, something extraordinary takes place. He wrote about this 100 years ago. So mathematicians, amongst many other people, everybody, are creative. Nobody has a monopoly on creativity, as we like to say. Here is an example. Some of you will know this. There are many engineers in the audience. It's from long ago, but I must admit I have a fondness for old cars. So I thought I would share this example. This is a very famous car from a long time ago. It's a Citroën. And a brilliant engineer at Citroën had a brilliant creative idea involving creative combination. So this is not a lesson. But the problem with using metal suspension is that metal becomes more compliant as the load on it increases. And so to those of us who are not engineers, what that translates into is if the car is lightly loaded, you have a pretty rough ride. And if the car is heavily loaded, you have a bone-jarring ride. So Citroën, a long time ago, came out with a brilliant idea. It involves precisely a combination in which hydraulics meets pneumatics. So on top of every wheel, you see in this rather wonderful photograph, they placed a sphere. And the bottom half of the sphere involved the hydraulics, and the top half of the sphere contained compressed gas. And it's not an engineering class, but the beauty of compressed gas is that it becomes less compliant as the load on it increases. And as we say in French, voila, the very famous Citroën ride suspension emerged. It's not to everybody's taste. Not everybody likes the Citroën ride, but undoubtedly it was a brilliant combinative idea. So this is a little lesson and reminder to me that in a program on creativity and innovation, whenever we talk about creativity and innovation, we should never forget it's not just about being creative, it's also about being, in this case, a brilliant engineer, or a brilliant artist, or a brilliant entrepreneur, or whatever the other technical, human, experiential needs are. And that brings me to a point that is involved in how we are growing our program. We're offering courses to our students, the students in the room, whom I will run over and say hello to momentarily, taking some of these courses. But in the end, we don't think our courses are what is most important. What is most important is that whatever we do, including courses, should affect profoundly all the other courses and projects and experiences which students undergo. It is not the course, it is perhaps the course in creativity remembered during a course in engineering. And so we have a very clear vision, therefore, of what success looks like when it comes to teaching creativity, innovation, and entrepreneurship in a university setting. This is a picture of some students at the very famous school of the Art Institute of Chicago, which has a long list of very famous alumni. Georgia O'Keeffe, the painter, Klaus Oldenburg, the sculptor, Cynthia Rowley, the designer, the list goes on. Very, very famous, super prestigious school. When I look at this picture, something jumps out at me. Actually, I've been bothered about this for years. In good entrepreneurial fashion, I'm bothered by something, like that soap dish in the bathroom for my friend Robert Taylor. It's always struck me as wonderful that art school students have portfolios. What a wonderful thing to have. And here you see students sitting outside on a sunny day with their portfolios in front of them. Why don't all students have portfolios? Why should only art school students have all the fun? And isn't there something actually profoundly important in the development of a portfolio? Not a resume, a portfolio. Moreover, what can we say about this picture? I bet you, even though we can't look inside, every portfolio is unique. For starters, they're all different sizes. Come on, okay? So each student possessed of a unique portfolio. That's, I think, a wonderful educational objective, and it's much too good an objective to leave only to art school students. So we have a statement of success, a goal for our program on creativity and innovation at NYU Shanghai. Here it is. Let me read it to you. Our purpose is to help every student create a unique and compelling portfolio of work that provides that student with a unique and compelling identity in the world of the future. Now, I hope you agree, like all good statements of purpose, there's a lot underneath here. It's a very competitive world. It's important to stand out. It's important to be unique. A resume only goes so far. A portfolio goes further. Portfolio, of course, calls on coursework, it calls on projects, it calls on startup activities, it calls on the full range of educational experiences. By its nature, it will therefore be unique and an expression of that student. It is also not something that should emerge at the end of a program. It's something that one should be creating in draft form from the very beginning so that it influences one's choices and direction. There's a lot underneath the statement, but I know you all get the idea. So when we talk about our program on creativity and innovation at NYU Shanghai, we actually care about creativity and innovation precisely because they are a means to an end. They're not actually an end in themselves for us. We're an educational institution. We serve our students as citizens of the world, as entrepreneurs, as scientists, as great humanists. And creativity and innovation, we believe, are very important in an educational adventure, in an educational journey, because they will lead to, they will enable, they will enhance each student's efforts and successful efforts in creating a unique and compelling identity in the world of the future. That's what we're up to. Thank you very much.